checking out Labyrinth. This is a really good book, man, by Randall Sullivan. It goes into deep detail about the Notorious Big and Tupac case. Let's go ahead and get into this part of the book, chapter 9, and I'm going to come back with my reaction. Hit that thumbs up button.
Simply as the Robbery Homicide Task Force, and its creation was largely a response to the detective work of Russell Poole. The connections that Russ Poole had made between the David Mack bank robbery and the Biggie Smalls murder, including the possibility that an LAPD officer or officers might be involved, were the origin of the task force, agreed Richard Rosenthal. The assistant district attorney's recollection was ironic, since by the time Rosenthal came aboard, Detective Poole viewed the task force more as the vehicle for a continuing cover-up rather than as a means for arriving at truth. During the last 2 weeks of May, Poole had engaged in a series of public confrontations over the handling of the Biggie Smalls case. First with Fred Miller, then with Lieutenant Pat Conmay, and finally with Captain Jim Tetreault. "I told Captain Tetreault I've never seen anything like this," Poole recalls. "If you want the Biggie Smalls case solved, you've got to give it to me alone." Several days later, Poole found a hand-drawn cartoon on his desk showing a toilet and the plumbing pipes connected to it. The words, "You are here," were connected by an arrow to a turd lodged in the pipes. Poole recognized the handwriting as his partner's. 2 days later, Poole flew to Chicago to interview Kevin Lewis. While he was gone, another senior detective filed a complaint against him, alleging that Poole had been derelict in monitoring the autopsy of a Los Angeles Unified School District police officer who had been killed by a shotgun blast to the face. Poole's lieutenant ordered him transferred out of robbery homicide, then reversed himself when the complainant's partner backed Poole. "For the first time in months, I sort of had an upper hand," Poole recalled. "The lieutenant had made all these accusations against me without waiting to hear my side of the story, and now he was afraid I'd file a complaint against him." Poole had been under an administrative cloud since the previous December when the department had brought charges against him for the first time in his career as an LAPD detective. The incident seemed so inconsequential at the time that Poole hadn't realized how it might be used against him later. He and his wife had separated for 5 months at the end of 1997, mainly because Megan was fed up with her husband's devotion to his duties as a police officer. "Living with a homicide detective is tough," Poole admitted. "Getting calls in the middle of the night, working long hours and only coming home to catch a few hours of sleep, being so absorbed in a case that you don't see what's happening in your personal life. I felt, look, it's a major responsibility to be a homicide detective. There's killers on the loose and it's my job to find them. My wife wanted me to put my family first and she was right, but I didn't see it at the time." While separated from Megan, Poole began dating a secretary who worked for the Los Angeles Police Commission. 10 days before Christmas, the pair attended a Robbery Homicide Division holiday party at Little Pedro's, a downtown restaurant favored by the LAPD. "All of us coppers drove our take-home cars," recalled Poole. "The woman I was dating and I only stayed about 45 minutes. I was exhausted. I'd been up for almost 2 days, with maybe 3 hours sleep in that time, and I had to get up early the next morning to fly back east. I didn't even have a drink. All I could think about was getting up at 4 the next morning." When they left the restaurant, Poole asked the young woman to drive while he took a nap. When she said yes, he kissed her on the cheek, then rolled over against the passenger side door and fell asleep. What Poole didn't realize was that his car was being tailed by an LAPD commander who would file a complaint against him for taking a department-owned car to the restaurant, permitting a civilian employee to drive it, and kissing her on the cheek in public. "When I went on vacation the week before Christmas, I figured I was facing the lightest slap on the wrist they could give me," Poole recalled. "For one thing, there were at least 24 other police vehicles in the parking lot of that restaurant, most of them driven by people of higher rank. Over the holidays, Poole reconciled with his wife and moved back into the family home. He came back to work in January feeling rejuvenated and was startled to learn that he faced a disciplinary hearing. I expected the captain and lieutenant to go to bat for me and say this is chicken shit," Poole recalled. "All the RHD detectives drove their take-home cars to places they shouldn't. Bars, golf courses, whatever. I didn't even know what the rules were because they were so loose. My supervisors were aware the parking lot of that restaurant had been filled with cop cars. I wasn't going to roll over on anybody, but they all knew." The investigation continued, however, and Poole knew by March that he would receive suspension days. I couldn't comprehend that they were spending so much time and effort to make a case against me for such a trivial thing, when they had all these guys working for death row who were walking time bombs in terms of bad publicity for the LAPD. I felt like it was the ultimate disrespect to me and all the other honest cops in the department. Poole eventually concluded that his supervisors wanted leverage. What the LAPD brass does to detectives working downtown is wait for you to make a mistake, then let you know that they've got you by the balls, Poole explained. The message is, you will do as we say or we'll use this against you. When they think they have you under control, they put you in a position where you can be helpful. The detectives assigned to the robbery-homicide task force in the spring of 1998, Poole would observe, included one who had been caught using the word nigger over the radio and another who had been accused of beating his wife. Poole's lieutenant, meanwhile, had attempted for months to bait him into filing a complaint against Fred Miller for dereliction of duty. Conway would come to me and ask where Fred was, Poole recalled. My answer was always the same. I don't know where he is now, Lieutenant, but I can page him for you. I could see the frustration in Conway's eyes. He was hoping I would tell him Fred was on the golf course. But I wasn't going down that road. I knew the veterans would crucify a snitch. When the LAPD brought him up on charges for misuse of his take-home car, they thought they had me, Poole recalled. It really pissed them off when I admitted what I did, signed the papers, and took my suspension days. I wasn't going to let them hold it over me. Poole's colleagues in RHD were sympathetic at first, but as word spread that he was trying to make a case against cops in the Biggie Smalls murder investigation, many of his fellow detectives began to observe that Mr. Goody Two-Shoes had feet of clay. There were a lot of innuendos of a sexual nature because the woman I'd been dating was in the car with me, Poole recalled, and that was painful because I was back with my wife and wanted to put that whole period in my personal life behind me. And the guys who were still on my side were keeping quiet, waiting to see how this whole thing would play out, so I felt more and more isolated. After the first attempt to oust him from the robbery-homicide failed, Poole's supervisors realized that having him around put them at risk. So they got me out of RHD by offering me a more prestigious assignment, Poole recalled. Captain Tetreault came to me and said, Russ, how would you like to join the task force and be in charge of Biggie Smalls and the connections to Mac in the bank robbery? I said, I'd love to, but am I going to have some power and leeway to do this right? I told the brass that time was of the essence because once Suge Knight went to jail, it was a perfect cover for the cops involved to get out of the organization. They promised I would have the power to get all the subpoenas I needed, but almost as soon as I joined the task force, they told me I was off the Smalls case. Fred Miller was embarrassed and had insisted that the Biggie Smalls murder investigation belonged to him, Poole was informed. So now the brass wants me to concentrate on Perez, Poole recalled. When we were first forming the task force, the main targets were supposed to be David Mack and any other police officers who might be involved in either the bank robbery or the Biggie Smalls case. And Perez was sort of an afterthought. That's what they said, and that's what they wrote, but it was all bogus. They wanted that on the record as the official intent, but once we started, they completely abandoned David Mack and Kevin Gaines and Biggie Smalls and the whole Death Row Records investigation. We didn't work on anything else but Perez. It was like the whole thing got transformed overnight. I knew it was coming down from the top, but nobody ever told me why we were doing what we were doing. I had to figure it out on my own. The other members of the task force also seemed uncertain about the parameters of their investigation. Just how large a criminal conspiracy were they dealing with, detectives wondered. Perez and Durden and Sam Martin were meeting for lunch every day, Poole recalled. Then they'd reconnoiter in the middle of the night in Griffith Park behind a urinal stall. We didn't know if they were talking about the bank robbery, the stolen coke, the Biggie Smalls murder, or all three. By the time Poole joined the task force, detectives working the coke theft case realized that Perez had for some time been taking advantage of the LAPD's absurdly lax system for checking out drugs as court evidence, especially when the amounts involved were a pound or less. Essentially, all an officer had to do was make a phone call to the property division, give his last name and badge number, then ask that the dope be sent to him by courier. The drugs had to be returned, of course, but no one at Property Division ever checked to find out if what they got back was pure cocaine or a bag of baking powder. How much coke Perez had stolen remained in question, but there was little doubt he was supplying a significant number of street dealers. During July...
Listen, this is good, man. Like, this is really good. This is a really good book, Labyrinth, by Randall Sullivan. Get really deep. Corruption. LAPD is very corrupt. You know, a lot of corruption in LAPD. You know, I believe that was the Rampart. I wonder, was he out of Rampart district, right? A lot of corruption. You know, that was dealing with the Rodney King case, and then the corruption with the Biggie Smalls case. Yeah. Anyway, rest in peace to policeman Poole. If y'all want to check out this book, it's called Labyrinth. It's on Audible. Go ahead and check it out, and hit the thumbs up button. Let me know what y'all think about this corruption in the police force. Leave it in the comments. Take care.